Hello, this is Heather Hoffman, and I'm here to share a card with you today using some of the new supplies from the most recent Simon Says stamp release, the You Are My Favorite. I'm starting off here with the Mandala Blossom set. It is a large stamp set. There are coordinating dies, of course, and then some fun layering stencils to use. And I'll be quite honest, when I saw this set, I kind of looked at it and I really didn't think it was my thing. I didn't think I would love it that much, but I'm working hard to use everything. I mean, it was pretty enough. It wasn't really me, but I decided to put it to use, and I'm so glad I did because I love how this card turned out, and I feel like this has suddenly become one of my favorite sets. So I have a panel of white cardstock. This would fit on an A2 panel. I decided to use a larger. Sometimes when I'm stenciling, I like that extra space. Eventually, I'm going to stamp with some black ink, but I'm starting off with FAWN ink, that VersaFine Clair. It's kind of a wet ink, and I don't want it to smear when I'm stenciling. I don't want to give it time to dry. So by using my Misty to stamp it, I'm going to use that lighter FAWN ink. I'll be able to stamp it, have enough of an image to be able to do my stenciling and line everything up. But this ink is softer, it's lighter, it's not going to smear when I'm stenciling. And then I'm going to leave everything lined up there in my Misty. That way I can come back at the end, re-stamp with the black, and get that nice, crisp, detailed line. So I have my little ink holders there, my ink stands that I'm going to use. And I'm just going to go through these stencils one at a time. You can kind of see on there's lines that divide. I'm not using the stencils for the butterflies. I'm just doing that one large main bloom. And this image is so nice and big. We're going to cut it in half when we get to the end to finish the card. But for now, I love being able to do it all in one piece. You can see, since I kept my panel of cardstock a little bit bigger, I believe this is 5.5 by 6.5. Don't quote me on that, but somewhere in that range. It gives me that little bit of extra room so then I can tape my stencil in place. As you can see, I prefer this to a sticky mat generally because I like being able to turn my image around as I'm stenciling and adjust. It just makes it a little bit easier for me. So I'm going to start with Honey and Taffy of my Positively Saturated inks. You can do each of these stencil layers with just one color per layer, but I like to kind of make things a little bit different. So I'm just going to kind of mix and match based on what I feel like doing for each of these stencil layers. So I'm going to start there with that honey ink, and I'm going to fill in the center of the flowers on this stencil. The stencils aren't technically numbered. I'm just going through them the same order that they were in the package. So for my purposes, I'm going to call this stencil 1. And you can see I'm leaving those other little flowers and then that larger bloom in the middle. I'm going to leave that, and I'm going to do that in the pink, which is that taffy ink. And I'm just going to come in with that honey. I'm putting a little excess ink on my glass mat. That way I can kind of pick up that extra ink, but it keeps me from having a really heavy coat of ink on my brush, so it'll help me get a smoother blend. Once I got my base layer on there, you can see I'm kind of coming in and adding a little bit of a deeper layer on each side. This is just going to add a little bit of dimension to the ink blending and make it a little bit more interesting. All right, before I come in with that taffy ink, I used my dry microfiber cloth to kind of get a little bit of that extra yellow off, just to help keep my brush a little cleaner as I go into these other areas. So now I'm just hitting those little tiny flowers and that main bloom in the middle. Basically all the areas that I didn't hit already with that honey, that lovely yellow cardstock. So the taffy is a nice deep color. I'm also not so much on the littler ones, but on that main bloom in the middle, I'm working to keep most of the ink in the center and kind of soften it as I go to the edge, just to keep that little bit of shadow and depth and shading for the variation in there. All right, now we're coming in with the next stencil. I'm just lining it carefully up and taping it in place just like I did with that first one. And then once again, we're going to kind of mix and match inks. As I was filming this, I was kind of deciding what I wanted to do as I went along. So I'm going to use that same taffy ink again. I'm also going to use some violet for some of the other areas. And then we might mix another one in on this layer a little bit too. But I'm going to start with these ones, starting with violet because I haven't used that color yet. So I'm going to use that on that second layer of that big bloom in the middle. You could also mask here if you want to be really careful not to get any color contamination on other colors. Most of what I'm doing, these colors are pretty complementary, so I'm not too worried if I get, in fact, when I peel the stencil off, you'll see there's a little bit of that taffy pink, a little bit on the edges of that purple, and I actually really love that. I almost kind of wished I'd come in with a little more color variation. I might use the stencil set again and kind of mix and match colors within each area just to get another fun, different look. So that'll just be something for down the road. It's pretty subtle, but you can see there's a tinge of pink on there. All right, next stencil layer. Gonna line this one up. This one adds those outer greenery pieces and then some more layers on the main center bloom area. I waffled a little bit on some of the inks I wanted to use in the end, but I was trying to pick for that green. And at first I pulled out there and I was gonna do Tropic, and then I kind of went back and forth and I ended up switching to Ocean instead for that. So either one would work. You could come in with a little more of a true green, but I kind of like these really bold jewel tones that I ended up going with today. So just a tiny bit of honey, that's just going to be the center of that large bloom in the middle. And then we're going to also use some Cadet, which is a great blue color. And that's going to be for some of those other blooms on there. But first I'm going to grab that Ocean. It's kind of just a deep aqua teal. Both of those, Tropic and Ocean, are kind of just different tropical blue tones, kind of in that teal to turquoisey kind of range. So they're really similar and they work really well together. So that's why I ended up using both on this card in the end. I just opted for the Ocean to start with there. And then Cadet is a great, like I said, more of a really true blue. And I came out on this one and just hit some more of those blooms on there. I think I debated a little bit on kind of mixing and matching colors a little more on this layer and alternating a little bit more on the blooms. But in the end, I just kind of decided to just go ahead and stick with it and just go ahead and do that blue on that last one as well. So this was a pretty even spread. I liked how the 4 quadrants. So it got that blue kind of evenly spread throughout the bloom, and it was just a good color choice for me there. I'm loving how these layers are coming out. All right, now this one I struggled. I was trying to get it lined up and couldn't figure out why it wasn't lining up. I thought it was defective. And then as I just kept going, what am I doing wrong? Why is this not? If that ever happens, take a little bit of a closer look at your stencil. Somehow I had flipped this one over and it was upside down. Once I finally figured that out and flipped it over or turned it around, there's a little... has the Simon Says logo etched on the stencil layer, and it should always be in the same corner. So if you're noticing that not lining up one of your stencil layers, do double check that, because as you can see, it wasn't going to line up with me turning it the other way. So that was a good thing to figure out along the way there. All right, so for this one, I am going to pull out that Tropic color, and we're going to use that on that center big bloom. We're also going to use a little more violet, but let's start there with the that Tropic color. That's going to hit that next layer. That big bloom is just kind of in the center. It's kind of the focal point with all the other ones just kind of supporting it. And I love how cohesive it is by putting so many different colors on that one. It kind of pulls all the different colors from the other blooms all around in. All right, and then we're going to grab that violet and hit a little bit of the other flowers there. And then I do remember there's a couple other little greenery spots. And I think for that one, I came back to the Ocean color, the same one that we'd used for those outer greenery pieces. And again, we could have just used the same as we'd used for this layer, but I wasn't really using this Ocean color on anything other than the leaves. So I wanted a little more of it on this image as well, just again, to kind of pull together and keep everything cohesive. So getting that in there, we're getting close to done with this stencil. I think there's only one left at this point. And I love how that image is coming together. At this point, it's still pretty soft, just because we haven't restamped with that black over the top. But there is that final stencil layer, lines up beautifully again. And then it's just a matter of picking the colors. I realized that big center bloom, I hadn't used any of the blue yet. So I did pull out that Cadet to tuck in there. And then I kind of just looked around at what color for the other 2 blooms looked like it kind of needed tucked in to kind of bring it all together. So I ended up using that Tropic again on that bottom right one, and the Cadet to finish the center of the large one. At first, I almost regretted choosing to do cadet on the very outer edge of that big bloom because it did put it right next to all of the other blue blooms. But in the end, it ended up looking good anyway. If I'd thought it through more, I might have switched that and kept it closer to the center so it was a little further away, but I really had no regrets on that. And then I opted just to use that same cadet. I was about to switch out the ink color for that top left one, but as I was going, I just kind of decided to roll with that blue on that spot there. All right, we have this image completely done. And again, at this point, it's so pretty. It has like a really soft, no line look. If I wanted to leave it this color, I probably would restamp over the top with that same FAWN ink that we did at the beginning. That would kind of make those lines a little crisper, but it would keep that really soft. It almost looks like a tattoo, I feel like, at this point. And I was so tempted just to leave because it looked so beautiful in those soft colors, but I'd already decided to go with the black. I'd committed to that, so I figured I could come back and do another one with the no line look later if I wanted to. But moment of truth, make sure it's lined up in the same corner of your MISTI there, stamp over the top, and just like that, I had no regrets of coming in with the black. I love the way it just made that image pop. I actually got a great impression, but I always love when I have a MISTI just taking advantage of that stamping twice because I can just make sure every line is super dark and crisp. And look at just how bold and beautiful that is. I let it dry just slightly because, again, that Nocturne ink is really juicy. I didn't want to touch it with my fingers and smear anything, especially since I double stamped the image. I wanted to give it just a tiny bit of time to dry. But then I came in with that coordinating stencil. I die cut that off camera, and there you can see just how beautiful that bloom is. Now that we're all done stenciling, we're going to move on to the next step of the card. For this, I'm using a new die set. This is called Petal Tipped Labels. And as you can see, it's a nice nested set. There's lots of different sizes in there, and I really love the shape. It's such a fun, unique shape. I kind of waffled between the second and third largest, and I ended up going down to the third. We're going to use this to create a window in an A2 panel of cardstock. I'm going to save that piece that I cut out and use it on another project down the road. But I just carefully tape that in place. That's highlighter tape. Sometimes when you're out through the die cut machine, the pressure kind of makes a little of the adhesive kind of stick a little extra well to that cardstock. So I always grab an adhesive eraser to get any of that extra residue off from running it through the die cutting and taping it in place. So I'm going to do, I feel like this scares a lot of people, but I'm going to cut this bloom in half. It's beautiful, it's gorgeous, but it makes it so much more versatile when you realize you can kind of change the shape of it by trimming it into two pieces. I want it to come in from both sides of my card, but before I cut that, I'm going to get kind of all of the other items in place. I'm going to use another new set from the release. This is called Delicate Lattice Stencil. It's a beautiful, just a good basic stencil to have in your stash. I love the design on it. It's a nice small pattern and super fun. And all I'm going to do for this is one of those crazy little details. It's so fun. All of the blending brushes I used for that stamp set, I'm just using the little bit of residual ink on this. This is kind of a great way to clean a little of the extra ink off of your brushes. And at the same time, you're not wasting that ink. You're using it for something beautiful. And it also ensures that you get a really nice soft blend. So I kind of made sure I hit all of my colors there. I ended up needing to add a little bit more of the blue at the top. But once I pulled that off, I was only aiming for the center. I just wanted it behind that window. But when I pulled that off, I kind of liked even that little shape that I ended up with there. If you look on the right sides there's a little gap in the stenciling, but my flowers are going to cover that up, so I'm not even going to worry about that. The part that's going to show is got a lovely little soft rainbow ombre that was really quick. It only took a few seconds, but it's going to just add that little extra something to this card design. And it kind of pulls everything together because there's a lot of bright open white space, but adding that color behind is just going to kind of help make that shape pop for that window we put on there. It kind of pulls those same tones that we've done with the stenciling, and it's just going to be a fun little addition. All right, you can see there I could have turned it over. I could have used a pencil. I could have put little snip marks or something to mark where I'm going to cut. But I just kind of made note of right between what areas I wanted it to cut. And then we made that big scary decision moment there. And as you can see, it divides on there and it just fits on there perfect. I kind of toyed with trimming a little more off to kind of adjust the angle of how those blooms came in. And I would have just kind of marked the spot and gone at an angle from the opposite corner. I really debated. I played with kind of arranging them both. It would have given just a different look and a different tilt to them. And that would have been really fun too. I don't think I would have had any regrets on that. But the more I kind of sat and looked at it, the more I just decided, you know what? I really just kind of like the way it is. And I decided just to leave it where it was, trimmed in half. All right, now it's time to pick a sentiment. And this is how I pick sentiments with clear stamp sets. I just kind of lay it over until I find one that I feel like fits where I want it. I could have chosen my sentiment just based on what I wanted the card to be for. Since I make cards in advance, I sometimes just kind of choose what sentiment fits on there the best. If I know I need a birthday card, or I know I need a sympathy, or I know I need a thinking of you or a hello, then I'll go with that. But I went ahead and stamped and die cut that off camera with that same black ink. And then to add a little interest to this, I'm going to round off a couple corners before I adhere everything down. I did it on that top panel, the opposite, the top left and the bottom right corner, and then did the same on the card base. That way they're going to line up perfectly. And then I wanted a little bit of dimension. I wanted this window slightly popped up, but I didn't want it super thick. And I love the Simon Says Stamp Big Mama foam adhesive roll. It's about half the depth of my normal foam adhesive. So it adds just a little bit of dimension without making it too thick and bulky, which I love. Sometimes when I want to put dimension between multiple layers, I know I can do that, and it's going to add up to the same result as if I just did one layer of the other foam adhesive. All right, I'm going to kind of floof up the edges of those blooms a little, a simple little way to add dimension. I'm going to adhere it with some liquid glue on the outside, but I'm going to use my regular foam tape for the center just to kind of stabilize it over that window. I'm using my regular foam adhesive that's a little bit thicker because it's going to pop that center up even a little bit extra. So the outside's going to be adhered on the frame, and then that inner is going to be slightly elevated even above what that frame is. So it's another way to just add that subtle little extra bit of dimension. You notice I put a little of my liquid glue on the foam adhesive as well. That way when I adhere this down, it gives me a little extra time to kind of wiggle it into place. I forgot to peel the backing off of that one first, but I'm going to do the same on this. And then that way if I needed to move it, it doesn't adhere down instantly, and it gives me a little time to make any adjustments that I might want to. Then I just had to decide for sure where I wanted that sentiment. I ended up picking that slightly more open area at the bottom. It just looked like it kind of snuggled in there good. So a little bit of foam adhesive. Notice on each of those, I double checked that I put the right amount of foam adhesive before I pull the backing off. And then a little bit of liquid glue on the side that's going to be over the frame. That way it's just going to hold that nice and stable, and I can adhere that down. All right, it's time for a little sparkle at the end. For this, I used some of Simon Says Stamp Dazzling Gems. This particular color is called Prism. I always feel like I'm saying prison, like I'm going to break out of prison, but Prism. They're beautiful iridescent, so they're just clear but with an iridescent sparkle. And it was just the perfect finishing touch for this card. Definitely not my usual color scheme, but I love those really bold jewel tones. I love that really dainty pastel background behind the frame. And I really love this stamp set. I hope you enjoyed. This card is also part of a blog hop today, so check it out. There's giveaways and lots of inspiration along the way. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.